God's world is so big, full of his beauty, evidenced in every person he made. We've all been given a gift to build and extend family, to touch generations, to make a real and lasting difference in every neighborhood, every life, building caring relationships so we can share the love of Jesus with every single person. But will we? The stakes are high. Loneliness is real, anxiety epidemic, despair commonplace, souls longing for eternal love. But are we paying attention, or are we too distracted? Well, I'm super excited that you guys decided to join us today. Today is a critical day when it comes to articulating what our faith is all about. Today we are going to talk about grace, and it is the one thing that I believe has the power to transform us like nothing else. You can't get this power anywhere else. And if you've ever felt stuck, if you've ever felt insignificant, if you've ever lacked purpose, you ever wondered, how do I get from where I am to where I feel like I need to be? This is the one thing that I believe has the power to change you like nothing else. And I want to define grace this way. Grace is a gift given to an undeserving party by an unobligated giver. We'll say that again. Grace is a gift given to an undeserving party by an unobligated giver. They don't have to give it. The person they're giving it to is not deserving of it, but the gift is given anyway. This is at the core of what we believe as followers of Jesus. And so whether you're here and you've been you consider yourself a follower of Jesus for decades, or whether you're kicking the tires on this whole faith thing, like today's a critical day because it makes all the difference in the world. And can I tell you, it is easy to forget the power of grace. So yesterday, I was in D.C. this whole past week with a whole bunch of pastors, hundreds of pastors from around the country, gathering together to catch a vision for what God can do in the upcoming months and years ahead for this country, and super excited about it. It was an amazing week, and I was just probably equally excited to get home. I've been kind of under the weather all week, and I was just eager to get back to my family, and my flight yesterday was at 3 p.m., and was just excited to get on the plane and get back home. Anybody else, you get like a little nervous in the airport, like until you actually get on the plane, it actually takes off, like all the details of walking through, the airport and making sure it all works. Like I always get a little nervous, but I was super proud of myself, got through security, got through, all the different checkpoints, got to the terminal, got to the gate. Like every time I do that, it's almost like a victory every single time. Like I did it, right? Time to spare, I'm ready to go. I approach 3 o'clock and there's zero movement on the tarmac. Like planes aren't moving, nothing's happening. I'm like, okay, this doesn't look like this is gonna happen. 3 o'clock rolls around, nothing. And then I get the update, you get those like text updates, hey, your plane's delayed like 20 minutes. I'm like, okay, no big deal. It's a little bit of a bummer. Was hoping to get home a little sooner than that, but guess it's not gonna happen. 20 minutes rolls by, no movement, and at this point, man, the heavens are starting to open up. Like thunder is off in the distance, lightning, and this massive storm is about to roll in. And I'll just cut to the chase on this one. What was supposed to be a 3 o'clock start time got delayed another 6 hours. And in the middle of all this, all sorts of flights are getting canceled. People are starting to lose their minds a little bit, It's all agitation. We move from one gate to the next gate, and when you're moving and there's all this stuff and nobody has any answers, and it's not like they tell you, oh, hey, just wait 6 hours, it's going to be fine. It's like every 20 minutes you're getting your hope up and hopes dashed, and everyone starts getting agitated. Well, in the middle of all this, all I'm thinking about is like how this is going to ruin my day. And probably Pastor Chris's day, because I was like, hey, there's a chance it's going to get canceled. He's like, no, please bring Pastor Scott home so you can preach tomorrow. Anyway, I'm just thinking the whole time, like, just how agitated I am, how, disgruntled I am. I'm getting angry. I'm perceiving all the people that are going to their gates as potential threats. If they get out before me, that's not fair, all this kind of stuff. And I'm telling you, in the middle of all that, God brings me back to the passage we're about to look at today, and he's like, come on, man. Can I remind you, you're not entitled. And what if I'm delaying this right now because I've got a moment that I want to create? What if you picked your eyes up for a second and got them off yourself and actually paid attention to what I might want to do? So at that point, I took some humble pie, and I was like, okay, God, let me lean into this. Let me lean into your grace, an undeserved gift. Maybe this is actually a gift, and I'm telling you, it was really cool. As I started getting my eyes off myself and paying attention to what God could do, I started seeing people differently. Instead of potential threats, they were potential opportunities to love and see them the way that God sees them. And everyone's all anxious and in a mess. And there's this one guy who was just kind of sitting. You can tell, he's got like the anxious foot tap going on, and he's like waiting and waiting and waiting. And so I strike up a conversation with the guy. And it wasn't long before he started telling me about not only graduating, but from college. He was from like Burlington, Vermont, had been studying in Florida for a number of years. And along the way, on his own, he starts talking to me about how the culture in Florida was so different from what he had in Vermont. And he said, and part of that was how faith-filled some of these people were. He's like, they started forming community and actually caring about each other. And we didn't have that where I came up. We had like no religious communities outside of Burlington, Vermont. I said, it's funny you say that, I'm a pastor. He goes, tell me about that. We ended up talking. I ended up telling him all about Jesus and what God can do as he gives grace in his life to completely reset the trajectory of him and his whole family. We planted some seeds that day, and I'm telling you, I would have missed that opportunity if all I was doing is looking at me. How many of you, when you're going through storms, all you can see is you? It is so easy to do it, and I'm telling you, we miss out on some of the most beautiful things that God wants to do in our life and through us in the lives of other people, because I'm telling you, I had an opportunity in that moment to take one of two directions. I can continue down my path of thinking about how this is just going to ruin my day and become more anxious, more kind of perceiving others as a threat, and blind to the bigger picture of what God wanted to do in that moment, or I could settle into the grace of God and into that moment, become a lot more peaceful and actually open to what he wanted to do in and through me. It changed my day yesterday, and I'm telling you, I was so grateful that God delayed things. As hard as it was to get home, when I got home, and let me tell you, praise God, I got on the flight. Yes, there is a God in heaven. Anyway, here's what we want to talk about today. I want to talk about this life-changing moment that all of us get to have with God when it comes to grace. His grace is available for us. And it's an undeserved gift, not because we are entitled to it or we've earned it, but because he loves us and wants to do something great in our life and through us in the lives of other people. This is where we're picking up our stories. We continue in the book of Jonah, chapter 2 today. We're talking about a prodigal prophet, a guy who was on the run from God, who wanted nothing to do with God, even though he was uber religious. And let me tell you, it is easy to be religious and still far from God. Some of you know that well. We're going to talk about his radical encounter with grace today and how it changed everything. Starting in Jonah 1:17, this is how it goes. It says, now the Lord provided a huge fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. How many of you, you grew up with the whole flannel graph picture of Jonah and the whale, right? You know this story really well, and you think the book of Jonah is all about Jonah and the whale. Can I tell you right now, number one, it wasn't a whale, and it's not about the fish. This whole story about Jonah has nothing to do really with him inside the fish as much as it is God's heart for every single person on planet Earth. We'll get to that in a second, but here's what happens. From inside the fish, Jonah prayed to the Lord his God. God gets hold of his attention. After he'd been running, right? God gave him this message. I want to call you from where you are in your comfort zone in Israel. He was a Jew inside Israel. I want you to go to the people of Nineveh and go talk to them about my love. Jonah didn't want to do it because he hated the people of Nineveh. He was a racist nationalist that cared only for his own people and wanted nothing to do with them. Again, review the story. He left as far as Nineveh was to the east of Israel. He wanted to go all the way to Tarshish, which is the tip of Spain, that far away from that so that he would just escape the whole thing. But inside the fish, God gets a hold of his attention and he starts praying to the Lord his God. And this is what he said. In my distress, I called to the Lord, and he answered me. From deep in the realm of the dead, I called for help, and you listened to my cry. You hurled me into the depths, into the very heart of the seas, and the currents swirled about me. All your waves and breakers, they swept over me. I said, I've been banished from your sight. Yet I will look again towards your holy temple. The engulfing waters, they threatened me. The deep surrounded me. Seaweed was wrapped around my head. I was watching as flights were getting canceled left and right. No. To the roots of the mountains I sank down. The earth beneath barred me in forever. But you, Lord my God, brought my life up from the pit. When my life was ebbing away, I remembered you, Lord. And my prayer rose to you, to your holy temple. And he says this next line that changed everything for Jonah. Those who cling to worthless idols turn away from God's love for them. But I, with shouts of grateful praise, catch this, he says, with shouts of grateful praise, not from outside the fish, from inside the fish, grateful praise, I will sacrifice to you. What I vowed, I will make good. I will say, salvation comes from the Lord. And in that moment, the Lord commanded the fish, and it vomited Jonah onto dry land. It's not the story we'd want for our life. When we think about God's best for us, we're not imagining, God, it'd be really great if I could just go out on the water, get thrown into the sea, have a giant fish swallow me up for a number of days, be surrounded by acid and all the nasty things on the inside of the fish. By the way, this is not even possible apart from a miracle. Like the fact that he survived inside of a fish, not scientifically possible, but it happened because of God's mercy and his miracle. That's not what we want for our life. And for some of us, the storms that you're going through, whatever they are, relational, financial, emotional, anxiety, whatever it is, sometimes in the middle of those you can imagine this is just God punishing me. God must not like me. He must not care about me. Can I tell you right now, most of what happens in our life is not God's way to punish us. It is God's way to provide for us. Did you see what happened here? He didn't send the fish to punish Jonah. Sure, Jonah was on the run. He didn't want anything to do with God, but he didn't send the fish to punish Jonah. It says the Lord provided a huge fish. This is God's answer for Jonah. You see, watch this. Jonah is constantly running from God. God gives him this call, and Jonah runs in the opposite direction. Guess who's hot on his trail? God pursues him while he's on the run away from God. Jonah gets into the boat. God throws a storm into the boat. Jonah gets thrown into the sea. God pursues him into the sea. No matter how far Jonah wants to run, there's no way that he can run far enough to escape the loving pursuit of God. And can I tell you, this is what the whole book is about. That no matter how far you run from God, there is no place you can go that his love won't pursue you farther. Some of you know that. Now, when you're in a season of running, the last thing you want to do is go to God. Any parents in the room, you know this, right? When a kid did something wrong and they're running, like there's a couple different options a kid can have when they do something wrong. They can own up to it, which is like the last option for most kids. They can lie about it, or they can run. Anyone ever seen a kid that did something wrong and they like scooted up to their room and just like hid underneath the bed somewhere? You know, like hoping that mom and dad wouldn't find them. A lot of us have found ourselves in that place in life. Can I tell you, I had that season when I was a freshman in college and I had my newfound freedom away from my family of origin. I just kind of started running. Did my own thing. Grew up, my parents were part of a church halfway through my childhood. My parents were radically changed by the grace of God, but I had forgotten about that. And when I got into college, man, I was just like, man, I'm going to have it my way. I'm going to have fun. I'm going to get into all sorts of trouble, take some rebellious risks. And whenever I did that, man, it just reinforced it because I got some great attention doing that. I got into a really unhealthy relationship. I did a lot of different things. And the crazy thing, and you know this, when you start walking down that path, like God's kind of speaking a little bit, even if it's way off in the distance. And he starts saying, hey, this isn't healthy. This isn't good. And you kind of wave it off a little bit, right? Like, I'm having fun right now. This is good. It feels good right now. And as much as that voice can be in the back of your head, like, this isn't healthy, you probably shouldn't do it, like, everything inside of you says, no, like, you don't know what's best for me. I'm going to keep doing this because this is a lot of fun right now. But along the way, you get to the place where you kind of cross a border, and it's not just fun. It's like you know that you've kind of gone a little bit too deep. Now, when you've gone too deep and you know that it's wrong, you're still not inclined to go back to God because at that point, you're worried about what he's going to do. Man, if I run back to God, like, he could disrupt my life. Maybe he's going to make it hard for me. Maybe he's going to punish me for what I've done. And so you're still not there. And sometimes it takes us reaching a bit of a breaking point for us to come back to God. How many of you know that in the breaking point, there's a mercy in that? That there's actually a relief in getting caught. Like when you're involved in something you know you shouldn't be doing and someone finally caught you, like there is that oops, oh crap moment. And yet there's a bit of relief to that too. Because you're finally out of the secret. You're finally out of the hiding. That's what happened in college for me. Finally got to that moment of realizing that this wasn't healthy, and I just put it all on the table. And I remember feeling so guilty when I came to God in that season, and yet in the middle of that pain and that anxiety and just wondering what God was going to do to me, there was tremendous relief. Like God had caught up to me, and I allowed him to. And I'm telling you, it was one of the freest weeks of my life. Brothers around me came around me, restored me, pulled me back up. I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for that moment. Here's what you need to know. God's not mad at you. He's mad about you. And he's going to do whatever it takes to find you. Whatever it takes. Even if it means throwing you inside a fish and letting you hit rock bottom a little bit. Here's the first thing I want to challenge you to as we look at this. Remember God's grace. Remember it. And if you grew up in the church, like you know this intellectually, you know that it's an undeserved gift. You know that God gave us something that we didn't deserve, and yet we can forget it. Jonah forgot this. And so we have to remember God's grace, and then in remembering it, let it remake us. It's the only hope that we have. To let God do something beautiful inside of you and through you in the lives of other people. You see, God wanted to do something not only great in Jonah's life, but through Jonah into the lives of the people that had no clue who God was. He cared about this whole city of Nineveh. It was filled with people who are running from God, had no clue about God. And he's like, I want to appoint you, Jonah, to go reach them, to go tell them and share with them how extravagant the love of God is. And you've forgotten grace. You've forgotten it. Man, I think that we can forget it sometimes because we take for granted God's good gifts to us. Like a kid who grew up in the home and, is like constantly demanding. You get anybody, like you had a kid at one point, like we're like, they're demanding all sorts of things. Hey, like I'm demanding TV. I'm demanding like ice cream in the middle of the day. And I'm like, who paid for your clothes? Who owns this house? Did you earn any of that? Like, that's what I want to say, right? No parent does that. I love you, sweetie. We're not doing that right now. We come entitled, forgetting, man, that only by the grace of God do we have any shot of knowing him. Now, here's what happens, and this is what's so foundational for Jonah. He's in the depths, literally in the depths. Like he's inside this fish, and the fish is like going all the way down to like the bottom of the ocean. In that moment, he comes to a startling reality. And it all hinges when he actually turns his eyes to the holy temple. Did you catch that? In the middle of all this, he looks once again towards God's holy temple. Now, there's some good news and some bad news with this. When Jonah, and like obviously he's not looking at the holy temple, he's inside a fish, but he's perceiving. That's what the Hebrew word says. It's like, I've been looking into this, been remembering this, I'm pondering about your holy temple. And the holy temple for the people of Israel, this is where they met God. This is where they'd come face to face with God, where they would get right with God. And inside the temple was the Holy of Holies. It was a special room where we would have like a very intimate encounter with God. And inside the Holy of Holies was the Ark of the Covenant, which was supposed to symbolize the presence of God. And inside the Ark were the 2 stone tablets on which were recorded the 10 Commandments. Now, the 10 Commandments were basically a standard of representing what it took to get right with God. And on those different 10 Commandments was a standard that none of us could reach. I mean, the holiness of God is so great that even just one moment of imperfection left us hopeless apart from God. So when Jonah looks to the holy temple, he remembers how far from God's grace he fell. That he's not just plummeting in the ocean at this point. Like all of his imperfections will never measure up to the goodness of God. And in that, man, that is the biggest, look, you and I need to know this. We need to know this. To let grace actually come into your life and remake you, we have to come to a startling reality that we're way worse off than we think we are. That we actually have a much bigger problem than what we tend to realize. For a lot of us, that we think, oh, my biggest problem right now, it's a relational problem. If I just had that special somebody in my life, or if my special somebody would just shape up, if my wife or my husband would just get better, like, it would solve my problems. If I just had a bigger bank account, if I just had the job that would be fulfilling and satisfying, like, that would be good enough for me. I could finally get where I need to be. I'd be happy. I'd have no problems. Like, that's what we tend to think of. And so we spend all of our time and energy and money to be able to get after these things that we think will satisfy us when they just won't. Jonah in this moment realizes his greatest issue is a broken relationship with God. And it makes sense when you pull yourself back for a second and look at the whole picture. If there is a God, and he made everything in this universe, then he must have made it for a reason. And for us to be able to be a part of that creation, of his intelligent design, being created with an inner sense of a longing for something more than what we're experiencing right now, then it's got to lead us to the God who made us. And the reality is we blew that opportunity, that incredible gift that God gave us to know him and to be in right relationship with him in this world. And because of that broken relationship, how many of you know that when you break a relationship, bad things happen? It's the consequences of sin. This is what it says in Ephesians 2. Watch this. Ephesians 2 says, "But as for you, you were dead in your transgressions and sins." When you come to the Holy of Holies and this Ark of the Covenant that has the 10 Commandments, it says a standard basically that we can't reach. It's like, in order to find God, you got to like jump on your tippy toes and reach the top of the ceiling. None of us could do it. We were dead in our transgressions and sins. Not just like you got to be a little bit better, pull yourself up a little bit to be able to reach God. Dead. In which you used to live when you followed the ways of the world, the ruler of the kingdom of the air, the spirit who is now at work in those who are disobedient. He says all of us lived among them at one time, gratifying the cravings of our flesh and following its desires and thoughts. We're all in this. Like the rest, we were by nature deserving, watch that, deserving of wrath. We're not entitled to the grace of God. In fact, everything that we've amounted up to this point and how imperfect we are basically entitles us to separation from God for all eternity. That's how it is. Jonah realizes this. And that's the bad news. But here's the good news. In the middle of the depths, as he continues to reflect on the holy temple, do you know what else he would find if he looked deep enough? That above the Ark of the Covenant, inside, right, you got the 10 Commandments, the standard that will never be able to measure up. It's way too holy. On top of the Ark, do you know what that is? On top of the Ark is the mercy seat. The mercy seat that covers the Ark of the Covenant and the 10 Commandments. And on the mercy seat, literally what it represents is a moment that happened once a year where atonement would be made for the people of God. The mercy seat is the seat by which you actually encounter God. And once a year, there was a sacrifice of an animal that would be made, and then the blood of that animal would actually be sprinkled on the mercy seat, essentially symbolizing a substitute made to pay the penalty for our brokenness with God. That because of some sacrifice, a blood that was shed in our place, we could find mercy and be reconnected with God. Do you know what that ultimately points to? When Jonah set his gaze on the temple, and he says it twice in this passage, what he doesn't even know is that God would answer that himself. That he wasn't looking for a perfect sacrifice from a human. He wasn't looking for a perfect sacrifice from an animal. He was looking at a perfect sacrifice that the God-man, Jesus Christ, fully man and fully human, alone could meet. He was the perfect Lamb of God slain for us. And when his blood was sprinkled over the mercy seat of the standard of holiness that we could never meet, only by looking at him could we find full forgiveness, full grace. And this is where it continues in Ephesians 2. It says, but because of his great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ even when we were dead in our transgressions. It is by grace that you've been saved. He's not mad at you. He's mad about you. And he's been pursuing you this whole time. I don't care what you got yourself into. I don't care how far down the road of pornography you've gotten yourself into. Nobody knows about it. I don't care how bad your marriage is right now and all the different conflict that you've experienced in your marriage that nobody knows about. God's running after you. And he's been chasing you this whole time. Would you open your heart to the grace of God that loves you even when you were dead? Romans 5 puts it this way. He says, see, at just the right time. Just the right time. When we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. I was reminded of that yesterday when I was in the airport, powerless to get home. I mean, no matter how much I could wish or perform for the airline industry, they're not looking at my performance at that point, man. When the pilot times out, it's over. We only got so much time in this world to get right with God. And can I tell you, when the time is up, the time is up. But Jesus says, I'm patient with you. And I don't want anyone to perish. Will you come to me? Will you receive my grace? And here's the crazy thing in this. Jonah comes to this place of realizing that I've been running from God this whole time. And I was turning to other things to satisfy me in ways that God alone can satisfy. You see, when God called Jonah at first, what he did was, God called Jonah to go over to Nineveh and preach to these people. Now, again, the people of Nineveh were wicked. They were evil. Like, they were so brutal in how they treated people and their human sacrifices and their, violence in oppressing other people. It was a threat to Israel because they were a powerhouse of the nation of Assyria that was dominating the known world at the time. And so it posed a threat to Israel. It posed a threat to the comfort that Jonah had. And the last thing that Jonah wanted to do was go talk to them. He wanted good things to happen for his people. For America. He was a nationalist. He was a racist. Couldn't see God's picture of love for anybody else. And so he runs away. And what does he do? This is so fascinating. Ready? He has this great plan. I'm going to go jump on a ship to go to Tarshish. You know where Tarshish was? Again, southern tip of Spain. It was gorgeous. Like, southern tip of Spain is like palm trees. It's like paradise. And he's thinking, man, if I'm going to have the ministry of my dreams as a prophet, like, I'm going to go do it there, okay? Like, that's my vision for my life. And in the middle of all this, watch what happens to Jonah's life as he says, those who cling to worthless idols, things to satisfy them in a way that only God can, they turn away from God's love for him. Watch what happens. Jonah goes down to Joppa to board a ship, and then he goes down below deck when the storm hits to fall asleep. He goes down then into the belly of the fish and even further down into the sea. Every decision that he makes to build his life and his value and his identity and his significance apart from God only brings him spiraling further and further and further away. I said this before, but how many of you know you could be super religious and build your identity apart from God? Self-righteousness. This is the idol that Jonah's talking about right now. This is how it works. For those who build their life on self-righteousness, it's I'm going to be so good, God owes me something. I've been good, I've done all the things, I've checked all the boxes, I've crossed all the T's, I've dotted every I, like religiously, morally. I'm better than other people, and so I should get what's coming to me. Jonah says this entitled, graceless attitude is what kills everything. How do you know you struggle with this? I'll give you a couple things. If you've ever said, ew, about anybody, you have not accepted grace. If you've ever been offended by someone and someone's lifestyle, you've not accepted grace. And what happens is you turn into a bigot. Horrible place to be, spirals down. If you've ever said, man, I'm really glad we're not like them. Whew. I mean, you see how they live, you see how they talk. I'm just glad I'm not like them. That's superiority. You've never accepted grace. You haven't clung to grace. And it turns you into an isolated person. If you ever said, how dare that? I can't believe that. And you just you're quick to lambaste everybody on social media and all the people who don't believe, vote, act like you do. You're combative. Man, you haven't accepted grace. It turns you into an angry, bitter person, spiraling down, 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 down. Self-righteousness destroys. It destroys you. And Jonah says those who cling to this, they run away from the love of God. How do you know? How do you get back to grace? Watch this. Jesus showed up at an uber religious person's house one time. And as he's having dinner with this guy, a really unexpected moment happened. He's having this probably intellectual, moral, theological conversation with this guy, and in walks this woman of the street. The minute she walks in, man, she probably brought a smell with her, a dirt with her that everybody knew because she'd been standing at the corner street waving guys down for far too long. She comes in and falls at Jesus' feet, and her tears start pouring out of her face as she pours perfume on Jesus' feet. She starts wiping his feet and anointing his feet with her tears, with this perfume, and cleaning his feet with her hair. I mean, it's an appalling scene. Particularly for this rabbi of rabbi, this religious person who was hosting Jesus in this moment. He's like, I can't believe she came in and ruined this moment. I was trying to make good with this guy who's been getting attention from everywhere. It's like, Jesus, do you even know who this person is? This is what Jesus said. He turned toward the woman and said to Simon, this Pharisee, this religious guy, do you see this woman? I came into your house and you didn't give me water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You didn't give me a kiss, but this woman from the time I entered has not stopped kissing my feet. You didn't put oil on my head, but she poured perfume on my feet, and therefore I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love has shown. But whoever's been forgiven loves little. Whoever's been forgiven little loves little. Therefore I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love is shown. You see how powerful that is? What he's saying is not she needed to be forgiven more than this guy is. What he's saying is she recognizes how much she needs his forgiveness. And the more you understand how much grace you need, the more full of love you become. And I'm telling you, in that moment yesterday when I'm at the airport and I'm realizing I am jacked up on myself and my own pride and my own anxiety and trying to get what I want in my moment to get home to the place that I needed for me, it didn't take me anywhere good, man. It spiraled me downward in a pool of selfishness until I could finally understand I don't deserve anything and I've been given everything in Jesus. Only in that moment do I have eyes to see people as Jesus sees people. That I'm just a beggar asking for bread along with everyone else. And it will change you to embrace the grace of God. Jesus said this woman is a hero because she understands how much I love her. You ever seen someone who's colorblind put on colorblind correcting glasses for the first time? If you haven't, YouTube it. Powerful moment. I dare you not to cry on the other side of it, okay? When you watch them put on colorblind glasses, it usually comes from a friend or a family member who gave it to them as a gift. You see these people who grew up their whole life not being able to see color, and they're scared at first, like they're terrified. Most of them, man, they'll open the box and they're like, they start shaking a little bit. Do I dare? I've only seen black and white my whole life. When they put those glasses on, man, almost every one of those videos, like they'll put it on and then they take it off immediately and they just start weeping. Because they had never known how much they've missed until that moment. They put it back on and like tears are streaming down their face and they're seeing everything in color. And it's 3D and it's popping out and it's so beautiful that they can hardly contain themselves. This is what grace does. It changes you. Because in that moment you understand we were so far from God. And yet he gave everything for us. I don't stand in the presence of God because I deserve anything. And neither am I so worthless because of all that I've done that he couldn't love me. No, I was this far from God and yet he gave everything for me. Do you know how much that changes you? Matthew 21:31-32, Jesus said to them, truly I tell you, it's the tax collectors, it's the prostitutes who are entering the kingdom of God ahead of you. For John came to show you the way of righteousness and you didn't believe him. But the tax collectors and prostitutes did. Why? Because they knew how much they needed God's grace. They knew how bad they were. They knew how messed up their life was. And they said, God, forgive me. I need you. How do we get this? Two things. Come to God in authentic, humble prayer. Allow the grace of God into your life by calling out to God in authentic, humble prayer. This is what Jonah did. He's in the distress. God threw him the storm. And he cries out to God in authentic, humble prayer. Bring your whole self to God. Bring your whole self. Like if you're in that place and you feel like the last thing you want to do is turn to God, turn to God. And his grace will meet you there. This is what he says, this is what he promises in Jeremiah 29. If you seek me, you will find me. If you seek me with all of your heart, just come with everything. Come with your fears, come with your anxiety, come with your anger. Bring it all to him. Just come to him. Stop running. Invite him in. Had a conversation this past week with a friend in the church who was struggling with his past and everything that he was ashamed of, all the bad decisions that he made. He's like, I struggle with it. I said, you're positioned in the perfect place. Because you're ready to receive the grace of God for you, and you're ready to give it away to everyone in need. Just keep crying out to him. Don't stop. Keep coming to him. He'll give you the grace. Here's the last thing. Respond. Respond to God's grace by making a commitment to follow him. You can't just stay in prayer. You can't just stay in reflecting on what he did for you. You got to make a commitment. You got to trust him. Turn your life over. How many of you know, like, plans only go so far. Research only goes so far. You can't learn yourself into good health. Like if you get that cancer diagnosis, you could research. That's not going to heal you. You got to put yourself at the mercy of the surgeon. You got to schedule that appointment, and you got to sign up for the chemotherapy that's going to help you, right? Like whatever you got to do, like you need to make a commitment. And I'm telling you right now, today you can receive the grace of God when you turn to him in humble prayer and when you make a commitment. That's his invitation for all of us today. It's the only thing that's going to change us. Will you pray with me? God, my prayer for myself and for my brothers and sisters today is just that you'd help us to realize how far we had fallen from grace. But remind us, Lord, that when Jonah was in the sea, in the heart of this fish for 3 days, remind us, God, that we were given an even greater gift. that when you walked this planet in Jesus, you gave us the sign of Jonah. When Jesus was in the heart of the earth, buried for 3 days after he was brutally crucified on the cross. He is the true and greater Jonah. God, and only in him, having taken the punishment that we so deserved and buried with him our guilt and our shame, everything that separated us from you, you took it on willingly so that in that place we could find forgiveness and new life. God, I pray today that every person in the seats, every person watching online would have a moment with you to cry out and say, God, take me. I know that I've blown it. I know I don't measure up. I know I can't rescue myself. I'm at forces beyond my control. I need you. I need you. God, I receive your forgiveness today. A forgiveness I didn't earn, but a forgiveness you freely gave me. Change my life. Help me to turn and follow you. I need your strength. Can't do it on my own. And God, would you so change me by your grace that you pour through me into the lives of other people so they too can know a hope and a love and a family like never before. May we be that kind of people, God, where self-righteousness is killed, where moralism is killed, where legalism dies, and we once again freely love the way you freely love us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
We hope you enjoyed today's experience. Don't just hear the message today, put it in action. What spiritual next step do you need to take? Go ahead and fill out that digital connection card and take that next step. Or you can just get information about how we can help you go closer to God. Right now we're going to worship through our giving, and you guys are so generous. Thank you. Your giving allows us to put into action God's transformative power by helping our friends and neighbors know Jesus, meeting real needs in our community, our city, and even all over the world. You can click the Give button right on our live stream page in the info section. You can give on our website at thewellnh.org/give, or by simply texting the $ in the amount to 84321. You can give a one-time gift or a regular gift by automating your giving. And listen, let us know how we can serve you by texting us at 97,000. We would love to hear from you. So have a great week. We'll see you next Sunday, and don't plan to watch alone.